She locked the bathroom door, fists clenched, voice shaking with rage, and screamed that she hated the CEO. She called him heartless, a tyrant, a monster who ruined lives. What she didn't know was that the man she was talking about was standing silently on the other side of that door, listening to every single word. And what happened next would change both of their lives forever. Right finger if you love powerful stories with shocking twists, hidden identities, and emotional justice, subscribe now. You won't want to miss what happens next. She didn't mean to shout. It just came out of her, raw and unfiltered, the way truth does when it's been buried for too long. The bathroom was small, tiled in cold white squares, the kind of corporate restroom that smelled faintly of disinfectant and stress, and she had locked herself inside one of the stalls as if it were a confessional booth. Her hands were trembling, nails biting into her palms, mascara smudged beneath her eyes, chest tight with everything she hadn't been allowed to say for months. The meeting had ended 10 minutes earlier, another public execution disguised as a performance review, another reminder that she was disposable. She leaned her forehead against the stall door and finally let it rip. She said she hated the CEO. She said she hated the way he smiled in shareholder meetings while people like her lost sleep wondering if rent would clear. She said he was a coward hiding behind assistants and glass offices, a man who had never learned anyone's name but had destroyed hundreds of lives with a single signature. Her voice echoed, louder than she realized, bouncing off tile and metal, her anger spilling out in ugly, necessary waves. She talked about her father losing his job years ago because of a corporate restructure. She talked about the nights she cried in her car before coming inside her tiny apartment. She talked about how she worked harder than anyone in her department and was still invisible. And then she said it, the line that would change everything. She said she hoped one day the CEO would hear what people really thought of him. She hoped he'd be forced to listen. She hoped it would hurt. Outside the stall, on the other side of the bathroom door, a man stood completely still. He hadn't meant to be there. He had taken the executive elevator down instead of up, distracted by a call from the board, stepped into the restroom because it was empty, or so he thought, and then frozen when he heard her voice. He recognized the name she used. He recognized the anger, and slowly, painfully, he realized she was talking about him. Not in a vague, abstract way, but personally. Every word felt like a mirror he'd avoided for years. He didn't interrupt. He didn't clear his throat. He didn't walk away. He stood there and listened as a woman who had no idea who he was stripped him down to nothing but his consequences. When the bathroom fell silent, she exhaled, wiped her face, and unlocked the stall. She stepped out, fixed her blouse, practiced the neutral corporate smile she wore like armor, and stopped dead when she saw him. Tall, impeccably dressed, calm in the way only people with power learn to be. Their eyes met, and for half a second the world stopped spinning. She knew him instantly. There was no mistaking the man whose face hung framed in the lobby downstairs. Her blood drained from her face as reality crashed down on her. He had heard her, all of it, the hatred, the accusations, the wish that he would suffer. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. This was it, she thought. Termination, security escort, career over. But instead of anger, instead of cold dismissal, he did something she never expected. He said her name, softly, correctly. And then he said, I think we need to talk. If you want, I'll continue immediately with. They sat across from each other in a conference room that had been designed to intimidate. Glass walls, steel edges, a table so long it made distance feel intentional, but now it felt strangely small, as if the room itself had shrunk under the weight of what had already been said. She kept her hands folded in her lap to hide the shaking, eyes fixed on a neutral point on the wall, bracing herself for the speech she had rehearsed in her head 1,000 times since leaving the bathroom, apologies, explanations, desperation. But the CEO didn't start with authority or anger or the clipped tone she was used to hearing in all-hands meetings. He leaned back slightly, loosened his tie, and said quietly that he hadn't planned to hear something like that today, and even more quietly that he probably should have heard it years ago. The words disoriented her. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. She had expected him to remind her of company policy, to tell her about professionalism, to reduce her to a line item on a risk report. Instead, he asked her why. Not in the way executives ask questions to trap answers, but in a way that suggested he genuinely didn't know. She laughed once, sharp and bitter, before she could stop herself, and told him it was all in the bathroom speech, how the company bled people dry, how the pressure never stopped, how loyalty meant nothing when quarterly numbers dipped. She told him about the performance review that praised her dedication while denying her promotion, about her manager taking credit for her ideas, about the fear that sat in her chest every Sunday night like a stone. He listened without interrupting, fingers steepled, eyes never leaving her face, and when she finished, he didn't defend himself. He said her father's name instead. The room went cold. She hadn't mentioned her father's name. She asked how he knew it, and for the first time, something like discomfort crossed his face. He explained that years ago, when he was still climbing, still fighting to prove himself to a board that saw him as expendable too, he had signed off on a restructuring plan that eliminated an entire regional division. He had trusted the data. He had trusted advisors who spoke in percentages, not people. Her father had been one of the names. He admitted he hadn't remembered it, until today. Until her voice, shaking with rage, had dragged the past into the present. She felt something crack inside her, a mix of vindication and grief, and the anger she'd carried for so long suddenly had a face. She accused him of ruining her family, of turning her childhood into a series of whispered arguments about money, of forcing her father into early retirement with a bitterness that never left him. The words came fast, uncontrolled, years of resentment pouring out, and still he didn't stop her. When she finished, breathless and shaking, he said something that stunned her even more than his silence. He said he was sorry. Not the polished corporate apology issued by press releases, but a simple, human admission that he had been wrong, that he had confused success with survival, that he had built a machine so efficient it forgot the cost of the fuel it burned. He told her about his own past, something no internal newsletter had ever mentioned. He had grown up watching his mother work 2 jobs after his father disappeared, had learned early that power was the only armor the world respected. When he finally reached the top, he promised himself he would never be vulnerable again, never let emotion slow him down. Somewhere along the way, he admitted, he stopped listening. Her bathroom confession had shattered that illusion with brutal clarity. He asked her what she thought should change, not as a trap, but as a genuine request. She hesitated, then spoke anyway, because she'd already crossed every line there was to cross. She talked about transparency, about mentorship, about measuring leadership by retention instead of fear. She told him the company didn't need another initiative, it needed accountability. When she finished, the room was silent again, but this time it wasn't heavy. It was expectant. He stood, walked to the glass wall, and looked out over the city below, a view she had never been allowed to see from this height. He told her he had 2 options: protect the image he'd spent decades building or finally confront the truth he'd avoided. He turned back to her and said that if she was willing, he wanted her help doing the latter. Not as a reward, not as hush money, but as a test of whether the company could be rebuilt from the inside by someone who wasn't afraid to tell him when he was wrong. She stared at him, stunned, knowing how dangerous trust could be, knowing how easily this could all be another performance. But she also knew something else now. He had listened. Truly listened. And that alone changed the rules. What neither of them realized yet was that their conversation hadn't gone unnoticed, and that someone else in the building had been listening too, already planning how to turn the CEO's moment of vulnerability into a weapon. By the time the elevator doors closed behind her, she felt like the building itself was watching her leave, every reflective surface a reminder that something irreversible had begun. She didn't know whether to feel victorious or terrified, only that the version of her who had walked into the bathroom that morning no longer existed. Over the next few days, subtle changes rippled through the company, the kind that only people on the inside noticed at first. Meetings cancelled without explanation, managers suddenly nervous, a request from the executive floor asking her to join a task force whose name hadn't yet been announced. She kept waiting for the trap to snap shut, for the call from HR that would end the illusion, but it never came. Instead, the CEO followed through in quiet, deliberate ways. He asked her to sit in on leadership meetings, not as a symbol, but as a voice, and when she spoke, he backed her, even when it made others uncomfortable. She learned quickly that discomfort was dangerous currency at the top. People smiled, nodded, agreed, and then whispered in corridors, their loyalty bending toward self-preservation. One of them, a senior executive who had built his career on proximity to power rather than merit, began documenting everything. The bathroom incident, the closed-door meeting, the sudden access. He framed it not as accountability, but as favoritism, as emotional compromise, as proof that the CEO had lost objectivity. The board meeting that followed was supposed to be routine. Instead, it became a reckoning. She was asked to wait outside at first, but through the glass walls she could see raised voices, the tension sharp enough to cut. When she was finally called in, the atmosphere had shifted. The accusations were laid bare, claims that the CEO had been manipulated, that his judgment was clouded by guilt, that the company was being steered by emotion instead of logic. They referenced her without saying her name, reducing her to a variable, a risk factor. The CEO listened, hands folded, the same way he had listened to her in the bathroom, and when they finished, he surprised everyone again. He told them the truth. All of it. He spoke about the restructuring, about the human cost, about the moment he realized leadership without empathy was just another form of cowardice. He admitted his failures openly, knowing exactly how dangerous that honesty was. Then he did something no one expected. He stood up and offered his resignation. The room erupted. Some protested, some pretended to, others hid their relief. But before anyone could respond, he added one final condition: an independent audit of leadership practices, transparency reports made public, and the appointment of an internal advocate chosen not by tenure, but by trust. He named her. The board hesitated, calculating optics, backlash, stock prices, but public accountability was a currency they couldn't afford to ignore anymore. The news broke within hours. Headlines framed it as a fall from grace, a shocking exit, a corporate scandal wrapped in redemption. Online, opinions split violently. Some called him weak, others called him brave. Almost no one mentioned her name, except in internal emails, where reactions ranged from gratitude to thinly veiled threats. Weeks later, she sat alone in a smaller office, one with a window that opened, reading messages from employees who finally felt seen. The CEO, former now, stopped by quietly, no entourage, no assistants. He thanked her, not for saving him, but for forcing him to listen. He told her he didn't know what came next, only that for the first time, it felt honest. When he left, she realized something else had changed too. Power no longer felt like a weapon aimed at her chest. It felt like responsibility. The bathroom where it all began was still there, unchanged, just another room in a tall building. But for her, it had become a turning point, proof that even the most dangerous truths could create something better when someone finally listened. And somewhere, in offices and break rooms and late-night shifts, people began telling the story, not about a CEO who overheard an insult, but about a woman who spoke the truth when she thought no one important was listening, and changed everything because of it. If you want, I can now.